Hi, how are we doing, everybody, and welcome to Russell Heritage Golf. Today we're kind of looking at the squat move. It's something that I talked about on the channel a couple of months ago, but I focused from a side-on perspective. So what I talked about was if you can turn the hips correctly in the start of the downswing, you'll start to create an illusion of kind of dropping height from a side-on angle. What we're going to be doing today is we're going to be talking very much about the squat move, but we're going to be talking about it from kind of a face-on perspective, you know, where this kind of feeling like you're going to be dropping down. Just because I've seen some content and it ties in very nicely with what I've been talking about on the channel over the last kind of a week, and then probably be the upcoming week as well, in terms of how the hips are supposed to move in the golf swing. Now, if you can understand how to sequence the hips correctly, you'll start to kind of introduce a squat move, right? And I'm going to talk about it in more detail now as to what it is. I personally don't advocate that you should try and squat to create the squat move. It's something that if you rotate and understand how to move the pelvis correctly, then all of a sudden you're going to start to demonstrate this movement. Now, in the backswing, and I've talked about this in more detail previously on the channel, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be turning into this hip. As I turn in towards this hip, what you can start to get a sense of, as I can anyway, is that I start to get a feeling of putting a lot of pressure into the ground. So those are the conscious efforts that I'm making. I'm going to be turning into the hip and I'm going to be putting a load of pressure underneath the floor to the point where I feel like my foot wants to spin if there was no friction underneath it. Now, that will help me create a pressure load in towards this side, and that's where I can start to get activation in the hip in this backswing position. What will also start to happen, and again I've talked about this before with golfers who have common problems of slicing, is that there's also going to be a degree of rotation around this thigh. Now, if you imagine I was wearing the kind of older trousers, and forgive me if you're somebody who still does, but where you have the seams working down the front of the leg. Now, what I mean is that as I kind of swing back, what you can see is the seam starts to move its way away from the target as you're looking at me. So this means there's a degree of rotation in this upper part of the leg as well. Now, basically, as I swing up towards the top, the first part of the backswing is that as I turn correctly, so I load in towards this hip, you can see the way my thigh starts to point outward. It means I'm creating a lot of pressure, but it's the first and most important part of having the ability to create the squat move. Because what I talked about a lot when I talked about separation is that once you pressure load this trail side, it basically means you can pull this hip back. And this is where I've done videos in the past of things like the chair drill and loads of different exercises to get you the feeling that by the time you get to lead arm horizontally in your downswing, you've created space. So your left hip works back onto the same plane as your right hip would be, but basically, more importantly, you're creating space without doing things like sliding or having an early hip extension. It's a really important thing to understand. Coming back to a face-on perspective, what would happen is that if I turn correctly and this rotates that way, and then in the transition, I start to pull this hip back, right? So this hip goes back into an internal rotation on this side. Again, what you can start to see is that this leg would start to face in the same sort of direction. So by the time I get just short of left arm horizontal, so around this area here, what you can start to see is the way both seams would be pointing back outwards. And this is another kind of visual for you to understand as to what the squat move is. Now, if you don't understand that, what I mean is you'll probably, if you video your swing from face on, quite a lot of golfers would notice they either move a bit kind of this way, right? So at the start of the downswing, a lot of golfers try and pull this hip back, but this one comes forward, and then you look like you've got no space. And that's what I'm trying to say. If you pressure load this side correctly, it means you can pull this hip back correctly. This thigh will stay outward facing as this thigh goes outward facing. And to be honest, if you want to have that as a little bit of a swing thought, then you can. But like I said earlier, if you correctly rotate the hips, which means they're going in and in, you can start to see the way that the lower part, so anything beneath the hips themselves, things like the knees, would start to have an effect based on the correct hip rotation. But my point is that if you want to load in towards this side and then get the feeling that that leg is working outward, then that's absolutely fine if you want to go down that route as a little bit of an easier feeling. The next time you watch the TV and you see the likes of Dustin Johnson on there and they're doing a slow-mo of his golf swing and they talk about the idea that he's really sitting down and all the rest of it, yeah, that's fine. It's a nice little picture to paint, but actually what you start to understand is what he's actually doing is he's pressure loading this trail side, and in transition he's opening up the lead side. As he does that, as you can see from a face-on perspective, he's going to start to look this way. Both seams facing away from the camera, neither are working towards you because I'm not stuck and I'm creating the correct hip rotation. And in my opinion, it's another important piece to the puzzle. The reason why is because, and the reason why I like putting content out on YouTube is that you've got to imagine, the analogy really is that it's like doing a jigsaw puzzle. If you don't understand or you don't have the picture in front of you of what exactly is supposed to happen, then you're going to really struggle to put the pieces together. And what this video does again is it's something that's going to make a massive difference. Maybe not. Maybe it's not something that you're going to massively start to focus on. But what is important is the next time you video your swing from face on, if you start to look a bit this way, at least you now know it's because you're not pressure loading this side. Okay, now it's a telltale sign because I've been talking about it a lot. If you have an early hip extension or a slide, it means again you're not pressure loading that side. But it's another little piece to the puzzle that might help some golfers out there that watch the channel massively. Some of you may feel like you don't quite get it yet, and I don't mean that in a condescending way, but eventually you will, and you'll start to understand how these pieces of the puzzle start to come together. Because as I've mentioned it before, if you could load the hips correctly and you can understand how to move the hips correctly, you're going to be a pretty good golfer, to be honest with you. As ever, hopefully you enjoyed the video. Always appreciate a thumbs up and a like. Remember, what's absolutely free is to send swings into the channel. Use the social media links which are in the description below. Basically, I just kind of look at the videos and give you a 60-second sort of annotation, point you in the other direction of what you're doing wrong and what video content would be best suitable for you. What's also absolutely free is to press that subscribe button. Press that little bell icon, means you'll receive notifications every time a new video comes out, and I'll catch up with you again soon.